Welcome back to Design Dungeon. This time we are covering Nico and the Sword of Light. It was a series based off of a comic by Rob Hoagie. Hope I pronounced that right. The pilot was made by Titmouse in 2015 and picked up by Amazon Prime for its first season in 2017. It did get a shorter second season in 2018, but we are only going to be covering the first. So aside from being an adaptation, what exactly is this series? Well, it has some elements of the sword and sorcery subgenre, but its scale and setting is more in line with high fantasy. Basically, it's a kid smashing his way through a crazy fantasy world that's been corrupted by an evil sorcerer. Now then, let's talk about the characters. I would say Nico is how you take an otherwise dull palette and make it interesting. He's got those cherry brown shoulder pads separated by a great tunic, below which are light brown fur pants. All this is accented with dark brown boots, wrist wrappings, and belts. The getup as a whole is reminiscent of the barbarian archetype of warrior. This is compounded further with his hairstyle. I mean, seriously, cornrows and a mohawk? A pure disregard for style. Absolutely barbaric! That said, don't let this kid's small stature and lack of contractions in his speech put you off. He's surprisingly sharp, and is seldom fooled for long periods of time. Without spoiling too much of the series, I can say that he most certainly rises to the occasion and becomes a far more rounded character than I thought he would be. His earnest efforts to be a hero is very endearing, as is the over-the-top manner in which he does so. The last thing I want to cover about Nico himself is the past champions that preceded him. This is actually rather different from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Instead of having to live up to the other champions, Nico's task is to surpass them. All of the champions were created with the purpose of defeating the sorcerer Narest, who aims to conquer the planet with his darkness magic. Each champion adds something new to the mix, both in abilities but also in personality. It is less of a cycle, but more of a player going through a roguelike. Each time, things are a little different.
Almighty!
Ah, the Princess of Carondelet and the Guide of the Champions, Lyra. She starts the series as a mere projection, incorporeal and utterly blue. Fortunately, circumstances push her to manifest physically, and we get her main outfit. Her adventuring dress is very nice light yellow and gold, very fitting for a Princess of Light. Goodness, this is going to sound like Kingdom Hearts when I'm done with this. Of course, the adventuring dress is a ripped-up version of her royal raiments. This, of course, is from necessity, as the long skirt would have just gotten torn up, and the adventure would have continued that way. Lyra is not just here to exposit and look pretty. Next to Narest, she's probably the most crucial character to the plot. Again, without spoiling much, she has learned from both the successes and failures of each past champion. Despite how far each one came, she still obviously has regrets about these failings, along with her initial helplessness when Narest came to power. She is an invaluable member of the cast.
Stylish!
Menadoc is actually the first character to show up, and is partially to blame for Nico emerging from his chrysalis early. Though you could just easily blame the monster that was chasing him. His look is very much in line with the merchant or commoner. Generally, he has earthy tones and a green tunic with a hood. Mix this with his vaguely rodent and lemur-like appearance, and you have a solid design for a cowardly creature. Mandoc simultaneously pulls from characters like Snaff and Orn, yet manages to somehow be quite endearing. The reason for which is simple. he pulls through for the group on a constant basis, proving time and time again that he can pull his weight. He's also a good source of witty dialogue between him and Lyra, especially when he brings up how the world changed between this champion and the last. Like Snaff to Lino, he also serves as a counterbalance to Nico's reckless personality when Lyra is not around.
Awesome.
Flicker is pretty easy to summarize. He, let's go with he for now, is a bug creature that was purified by Nico in the first episode. Over the course of the series, he will occasionally go into a chrysalis and grow bigger, eventually becoming a far more useful and valuable member to the team, and just looking plain cool.
Alright.
I must say, when it comes to an effective villain design, Narest is very solid, despite not being solid. Just the dark purple ghostly figure with only remains of humanity being a face and hands. I must also add that he's animated flawlessly. All the subtleties of Steve Bloom's performance really come through. Character-wise, I think he's a lot like Lothor from Ninja Storm. He mainly sits on the throne, sending out minions to stop Nico, and choose them out when they fail or just pester him. Usually both. So how does this guy avert Snoke syndrome? Well, quite simple. He is straight up a ghost! So long as his crystal is missing the shard that Nico uses for his sword, Narest can't physically interact with the world. So really he has to create minions by corrupting them with darkness. Naturally, in true big baddie fashion, Narest has different forms. There is his old human form that is in the flashbacks of episode 4. I like that his purple coloration carries over from his phantom form, or in this case it carries into his phantom form. Then of course there is the Super Omega Aku Square Enix Final Dark Form of Darkness form.
Stylish.
Raspa is Narest's familiar, which in an almost archetypal fashion is a talking crow. Really, he's just there to play off the more serious Narest. Aside from that, he has a giant form with fangs. That's about it.
Blast.
The Opossum Trio, as I call them, are minor reoccurring characters that constantly try to catch Nico but ultimately fail horribly. Also, they're basically the hyenas from Lion King. No, the real Lion King. Much better. There's also the fact that when they're in their corrupted state, they resemble a more hyena-like version of Cerberus with a lot more eyes. They're solid for comic relief and the occasional threat.
Brutal.
A word of warning, we are approaching spoiler character territory. Skip to this time in the video to not ruin several plot twists for the show. Starting with the lesser spoiler, Jackal here is an agent of Narest. Sure, I have him here on the spoiler side, but let's be honest, he was very shifty until he actually took off the hood. That said, his dark green hooded outfit does give his true nature away, and contrasts him with Mandok, especially since this was around the time that Mandok was also an unwitting spy for Narest. At the time, there was an air of uncertainty during the story. Both Jackal's treachery and Mandok turning against Narest made for a nice short arc for the two.
Brutal.
Well, this one just kind of speaks for itself, but in case it hasn't hit you yet, Aura was one of the champions that failed to defeat the darkness. Naturally, she has some of the visual aspects that Nico has, save for, of course, being a grown woman and using a bow. That said, there are two major aspects that really separate her from Nico. First is that instead of her purifying corrupted beings like Nico, she destroys them. This also reflects her less heroic nature that really separates her from Nico. She and the other champions were mainly fixated on their goal, while Nico fights to save everyone. giving him the proper motivation and help to see his mission through. Aura is a much-needed mirror to Nico, and while her appearance is brief, she was very impactful for both Nico and Lyra's character arcs.
Alright.
That should do it for the important characters for this show. All in all, it's a solid series. I sort of glossed over the animation quality, but it's very fluid, and the art style is also quite distinct. Pity it's only on Amazon Prime, otherwise it would probably be more well known. Next time on Design Dungeon... Oh jeez, Raph, what have you been taking?